As healthcare moves away from traditional fee-for-service models, providers need a strategy to stay competitive. That's where Strategic Healthcare Partners comes in. We offer expert consulting and ongoing management oversight for providers looking to form an accountable care organization. From financial feasibility analysis to helping you choose the right ACO in a crowded market, SHP provides the clarity you need to make informed decisions and transition to value-based care. Learn more at shpllc.com.
Welcome to Beyond the Stethoscope Vital Conversations with SHP. I'm your host, Aaron Higgins, and I'm here with my co-host, Jason Crosby. How are you doing, Jason?
Hey, Aaron. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm pretty excited. So I'm a little sad. This is the last episode of our season and the last episode of our series about if your practice went bananas. So Jason, can you kind of recap where we've been? Not the whole season, but over the last 3 episodes.
Yeah, so we tried something a little different, right? We didn't want to be stagnant and just interview folks, different topics. We wanted to see if maybe get a little creative. And so we started off with just a highlight of who exactly are the Savannah Bananas, right? Because some are not familiar with it. But then to try and have that crossover of how could a organization, and they're purposely not a baseball team, as he'll say at times, but he being Jesse Cole, but how can a team like the Bananas, with how they put fans first, translate to our industry, specifically kind of that physician practice setting? And so from there, I liked how we sort of dove into this is the process when you buy your ticket to where you schedule your visit, and follow those comparisons along side by side and identify those differences. And from there, and going into last week's episode, was about some of the success being tied to staff engagement, right? And so we touched on the triple aim. Those in the industry obviously know of that, and the 3 pillars of triple aim. And we talked about how patient engagement on our side compared to the staff or team engagement on the Savannah Banana side. And lastly, how that translates into quality, right? One of the other pillars of triple aim. And so the crossover of how we might be able to learn from another industry and how they do things differently, because our industry certainly could use a shakeup now and then. And I know this last episode, we're going to touch a little bit more on the Yellow Tux himself and how the leadership perspective can cascade down to the staff and have that change and engagement that affects us all, whether we're a patient or a fan in that case.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation that we're going to have. So thanks for recapping. It's been a few weeks since we first started this series, so I know I needed a little bit of a reminder. I turned 40 this last week here, and so my memory's not quite what it used to be. So okay, Jason, well, let's jump in. Let's put on that yellow tux and let's talk about how leadership plays such a critical role in making your practice, your hospital, your healthcare provider go bananas.
Yeah, and to touch on some of the recap as well, our very first episode, which we've mentioned a couple times during this series, includes Scott Regan. In fact, it was a 2-part series. And Scott did a lot of case study type discussion around how he himself, with some of his clients, physician administrator clients, he had to engage them to go sit in your lobby and observe. See what you think from the patient's perspective, right? Because we're all too busy to do that at times. And I found that still carries even over to this discussion about Jesse Cole in this case, right? He's very active online. And for those that don't know, he just released his 3rd book called Banana Ball. And we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But
I don't know how he finds the time.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And with child as well, right? And so
right.
His passion is actually, I think, part of the success. As he says, he loved playing the game. He played in college, but he has a passion towards making folks happy, seeing smiles, engaging folks, and more specifically, I think, as he put it, what the game could be. And so I find that interesting. If you're an administrator, what could that engagement in the waiting room or the visit or the scheduling, what could that be, just as he's put it? And again, to go back to Scott Regan's point about sitting in the lobby, one of my favorite stories about Jesse Cole's in that first couple of seasons, he would sit in the stands disguised, and he purposely would go drive to the stadium in the parking lot, just like we all do as fans, walk up, buy the ticket, blah, blah, et cetera, sit in the stands and observe it from that perspective, not in his yellow tux. And he always took a lot away from that. And so it's interesting to hear that was his approach. And at the same time, Scott Regan, who we all have great respect for in his experience, also highlighted that same perspective as sort of a starting point to how the leader themselves are engaged.
There is that really popular, and I think it's still on the air, undercover boss. So I take it you're not saying they should put on a fake beard and wig and pretend they're a patient, but how could a practice or a hospital, go undercover, or how could they actually truly have an experience? Because I think the staff would know who they were, and that's going to taint some of the experience. So how would you recommend a practice or a hospital figure out how to do that?
Yeah, it's certainly a different perspective on the practice side. In the hospital setting, we always knew that, and this is going back to my IS days, where Disney characters, if I saw that Disney character patient name, then we knew that there was probably a VIP test or perhaps a VIP patient. But that at least allowed them to go from the medical record patient flow from a data perspective, right? But you're exactly right. We had some executives also through the facility that would try and disguise themselves and simply walk through the process. Another example is what we call rapid action teams, and these were very time sensitive, budget outlined teams from different departments that were authorized to make changes on the fly, from moving a wall in the ER to moving the Pyxis machine in the ER, whatever they felt while walking through at the moment needed to happen, make it happen. So that way, as you mentioned, yes, we are recognized, but at the same time, we're going to make this change now. And, back to Jesse Cole, he has translated that in some of his work as sometimes you got to work on the fly and make adjustments, right? He, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, lost his voice while they were in Kansas City for 2 games. And so they had to make adjustments that they haven't done in the 6 seasons they have been the Savannah Bananas. But they made the adjustments on the fly and were very successful at doing so. And so I think that adaptability, to your point, whether you recognize or not, is just as important.
Yeah, so let's talk about those rapid action teams as you described. I think from a leader's perspective, that's a little scary, because that's a lot of risks there. What if that wall, what if you like that wall as the CEO and you've empowered other people to potentially knock a wall down, and what if it doesn't work? And I think as a leader, you start doing those what ifs. Well, what if these ideas don't work? How do folks like Jesse, how do the Savannah Bananas in particular, how do they adjust if something doesn't work?
What I always find interesting, his perspective is, first, he's got the daily 10 ideas sort of perspective that he writes down. They do have, as I think we touched on in the last episode, while they do have rehearsals, but I believe it's every game, there is one new thing that's tossed in there. And they recap at the end of every game, and they realize what mistakes were possibly made and whether they need to be scratched, revised, or whatever the case may be. But they acknowledge the fact that they tried something. And I always take away his positivity that no matter the outcome, in particular if it's a failure, they learn something in order that allows them to get better, right? And then the staff is engaged simply because he allowed them to go out there and try something. If somebody's got a good idea, they implement it. And it gives that staff member empowerment that they hadn't had before. And he's willing to take that risk because he understands there's more benefit than simply the one skit that may be presented during the game. The longer gain is the fans you're going to get and the staff member engaged. And so he's got that perspective, to your point, about maybe some of our administrators are too fearful to take that on. Well, that might be part of the problem, right? Sometimes you got to take those risks that empowers your staff.
Well, I think back to some of the great people I have worked for in my career, and one of the folks that I worked with, he gave me this little nugget. You can fail as long as your failure isn't fatal. And what he meant by that is he gave me a lot of leeway in the choices I made and the direction I was going with the organization. And the only time he would really step in, because I would ask him all the time, like, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? And what he was saying is try it. If it doesn't work, oh, well, you've learned something. And he would only step in if he felt my failure was going to be fatal, meaning that it was going to be so colossally bad for the organization that it could cause harm either to the organization or to people. And I think that's where a good leader really thrives, and where Jesse Cole will thrive. Yeah, he may think, oh, that little skit, that's silly, or this idea, but if he trusts his team enough and he has safeguards in place to make sure no failures are fatal, then that allows creativity to run wild.
It does. Not, you remind me, just in terms of the administrator having some creativity. One that popped in my head, that one of our administrators, a client of ours, took a different perspective in his hiring, and it was a front desk person, front desk scheduler. And as he was walking through, he overheard them on the phone with a patient. And he made the comment that he was so taken back with this overwhelmed feeling of how she was presenting herself from a customer service perspective. He had no idea who she was. So he engaged her and talked and learned she had just come from employed for 4 years at Chick-fil-A. And so he just thought, well, look at there. There's not this, you have to be stuck on, we need to hire somebody within our industry or somebody that was, engaged in customer service from this perspective or that perspective. Whoever hired that person realized, okay, they came from that atmosphere, right? That sort of customer service obviously comes first sort of atmosphere. That was Chick-fil-A. And this administrator who's got tons of experience, big staff, this one person caught his attention more than the others, and she was very new. He made that comment. And I found that kind of enlightening, that they took that perspective of, let's look at from this skill set or atmosphere experience, not, industry skill set type of perspective. And that's just, to me, that's another way of a leader being creative and taking an approach that this person, a front desk scheduler, that's the first person you call, right? We've talked about that, I think, in the second episode, where that is your first interaction with a practice when you call to schedule your appointment.
I have a friend who worked for Chick-fil-A fresh out of high school, which, if you do the math, was about 20 some odd years ago for me. And to this day, we still tease him because we'll just randomly say thank you, and he impulsively says my pleasure. But that goes to training, right? It points to that training and almost, for lack of a better term, the indoctrination that occurs. If a fast food place that slings a really good chicken sandwich can do it, surely your healthcare organization that has millions of dollars behind it, that changes people's lives, can afford to do that sort of level of training.
It's just part of this last book that Jesse Cole's released. I caught an excerpt of it, and he emphasized one of the things he picked up from Disney. That's of course what he tries to pattern his behavior after, right? Is all the Disney, kind of like we're doing here with this podcast. The power of plussing, and how basically he has put as part of the culture how they're always looking to plus the show. And when I heard you just now, for example, how Chick-fil-A does it's my pleasure. That's a small plus. And that's kind of
Right.
Jesse Cole's point of always look to plus every show or in there, and it's interesting. He says show and not game because that's how he looks at it. And I just found that very interesting. He looks at himself as the, chief storyteller, I think is how he put himself one time. So taking that sort of different perspective in little increments goes a long ways. The power of plussing. So just another little nugget he tossed out there and how to kind of approach things.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the plussing is certainly to pardon the pun, it adds up, right? It's the little things. It doesn't take much to make a bad experience, right? It just takes one thing, and it doesn't matter what all your pluses are. And that's why it's so important that you do have a lot of pluses and you work really hard to make sure there is never that one thing that ruins the experience. Okay, so Jason, let's kind of sum things up and wrap up today's episode. Bring us home. Let's land this plane.
Yeah, so hopefully, we've tried to make the comparisons between the industry. We can't control reimbursement models and that complexity, right? We don't want to touch that. So we don't want to make that comparison between the different industries. But we hope that these different parts touched on the first contact you make and how valuable that front desk scheduler is, just like when you buy your ticket or meet the players outside the stadium, all the way through the staff engagement, and how if you take that Yellow Tux perspective and you go out there and take yourself through the process, how valuable that is to create what should be a fan. It's one of our 3 pillars, right? It's part of the triple aim. And I think if we look at it from the same perspective as a Jesse Cole, where you put the fans first, you'll just naturally, I would say, ace that patient engagement portion of the triple aim. And so we'll continue to watch, Jesse. It's a fun if you're not familiar with the Savannah Bananas, hopefully this 4-part series was able to open up some eyes. And I would encourage you to follow him. He's very active on LinkedIn. Obviously, he's got the 3 books. And if you're ever in the area, I would check out a game.
If you can get tickets, that is.
He just had an article this past week. They have over 600,000 now on the waiting list for tickets.
Wow.
600,000 and he made the comparison, we've made the comparison as well about comparing it to the Harlem Globetrotters. Well, his cast, as he puts it now, is up to 110 folks. And so
that's amazing.
It's blowing up, isn't it? But
yeah, that is.
Maybe someday we can be the part of the man-nan-us. And we'll leave that out there for people to research what that is, and as a scary sight as that could be.
Oh boy. Well, thank you, Jason. This has been a great mini series within our season. So again, folks, this is the last episode of season 2, and of course, part 4 and the last part of our mini series on if your healthcare provider went bananas. Thank you to Jason for recording all these and one of them without me as I was recovering. But we do want to invite you to go to our website, shpllc.com/podcast, and take a survey. We're really curious as to what you think worked well this season, what maybe you think didn't work well this season, and what you might want to hear about in season 3. We'll be picking up season 3 later this year. We're going to take the summer off, maybe retool a few things based off of your feedback, but we sure would love to hear from you. So it's shpllc.com/podcast. And the survey will be up by the time this episode airs. And with that, Jason, anything to share?
No, we appreciate everyone's listening and look forward to your input. And everybody have a great summer, and we'll catch back up in the fall.
That sounds good. Have a good summer, y'all.
You've been listening to Beyond the Stethoscope, Vital Conversations with SHP, a production of Strategic Healthcare Partners.
For more information about our podcast, including back episodes, show notes, transcripts, and more, visit our website at shpllc.com/podcasts.
And I know you've heard it before, but please consider rating our podcast in your favorite podcast app. It helps make others aware of the show.
And our podcast wouldn't be possible without our wonderful team of folks.
Editing and production assistance by Nyla, Wiebe, and myself, Aaron Higgins.
And your episode hosts, are Aaron Higgins and myself, Jason Crosby.
Our social media coordinator is Jeremy Miller.
Our executive producers are also our principals, Mike Scribner and John Crew.
For more from SHP, consider following us on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
And as always, thank you for listening and have a great, wonderful day.
You already know that understanding your data is key to improving patient outcomes and financial performance. But how? At Strategic Healthcare Partners, our analytics services help turn your EMR and other data sources into actionable insights. From identifying areas for improvement to guiding you through implementing changes, SHP supports you every step of the way. Our performance analytics service dives even deeper, providing custom reports that help you stay ahead in the transition to value-based care. Unlock your data's full potential with SHP. Learn more at shpllc.com.